there were a couple of things rumbling through my brain, and then I stumbled across a conversation that I thought had so much relevance, and it taps a topic that I feel really strongly about. And I think anyone who is serious about writing, and I don't mean someone who is necessarily professionally a writer, but who approaches whatever writing they do seriously, and it's not just something they toss off, it's something that where they are turning to that form of expression to, because they have something to say and they care about the way that they say it. So the thing that I want to talk about is developing a creative rhythm, and why I think it's really important. It's going to be so individualistic. It's the kind of rhythm that someone develops is really idiosyncratic, because developing a creative rhythm depends so much on knowing yourself and being aware of yourself and what gets you the kinds of results that you want, and that helps you be the expressive person that you want to be. That's going to differ for everybody, just as the time that they write, what part of the day they choose, what conditions they need to set. But within all of that, I think it's absolutely critical that people develop a creative rhythm. And here's a part of the conversation spoken by someone else, but exactly echoing my sentiments, that I would like everybody to take in whole, and I would be happy to elaborate it on it for a bit. But I think it's the idea that anyone in a creative endeavor, and writing, no matter what you're writing, you have to consider it a creative endeavor, because it's you have to generate it, and it reflects you, your brain, your thinking, your expression. So I think that's what distinguishes creative people, and everything in the world becomes a stimulus for creativity. And this conversation, for me, was a stimulus. I jettisoned everything else that I was thinking about. I tabled the ideas. They'll come up again some other time. But when I saw this, I thought it's so much the capstone of so many things that we've been talking about over these Sundays, that I think now is the moment to bring it up. And it's really about this creative rhythm. And I think that you have to have a concept of yourself. And it's just totally essential to being a writing person, a creative person, in any of the arts, anything that you have to generate. And you have to become familiar with how you do it and how you do it best. So it's hard while you're doing it. In fact, if you're doing it right, you're not aware of what it is you're doing, because hopefully you're in a state of flow. And in a state of flow, there is no self-consciousness whatsoever. You're just one with whatever it is that you're trying to do. And of course, that's the state that you want to be in, that magical, wonderful, beyond rewarding state. It doesn't happen every time you sit down to write, but I hope everybody experiences it at some point. Um, and um, so you don't have an awareness of yourself while you're doing it, hopefully, but after you've done it, it's worth reflecting on what were the conditions? What was I doing? What did I prepare? What was in place that allowed me to get into this state? And whether it's that state or any other state where you write, I think that you have to become familiar with how you do it, and you have to do it enough. So that's like the second condition. You have to do it, and you have to do it enough so that you can develop a rhythm. And the beautiful thing is when you develop a rhythm, the rhythm is one of the things that pulls you along in doing what you do. So on the days even when you may not be as fully motivated as you are on some other days, the idea of being in a rhythm and carried along by a rhythm is a very appealing idea. Whether you're writing, whether you're taking photographs, whatever you're doing, getting into that rhythm is a thing that facilitates flow, and it's just a lovely state to be in. And I think there's so much chaos in our lives and uncertainty in our lives right now, so that this becomes a very particularly apt thing and a very rewarding thing, and just adds a point of goodness at a time when so many things are working against us. So rhythm means you have to practice, you have to do it, and you have to develop an awareness of what it is that you're doing and what makes it work. Because those are the conditions you're going to need every time you sit down to cook. And you could think of writing like cooking, because chefs will have everything in place that they need. And writers have to have everything in place that they need, all of the conditions, whether it's silence, whatever it is. And of course, in writing, most of the preparation is in your head, or access to it. If you're reporting on things, the information, you have to have it there. You have to know what works for you, what assemblage of things, and then you just have to do it. I mean, there is no getting away from practicing and doing it. And when I say practice, I mean doing it or a large number of times, frequently enough so that there is some consistency. And even if there isn't consistency, you have to notice within the inconsistencies, what are those necessary conditions that really foster you getting into the productive times. So there's doing it, there's time, there's practice, there's that self-observation, moving towards self-knowledge. And until you really develop a rhythm, there has to be a little bit of discipline. And I don't use that in a bad way. I think that everything in life requires a certain amount of discipline. And by discipline, I mean you just simply have to say, I have to set aside time for doing it. And I realize many things in life impinge on times that we set, and we may have to postpone, and we may have to put off. But if you're like most writers, kind of a steam builds inside, and you have to get that time. And so I would say take it seriously, that you have to find some time. It doesn't have to be a lot even, but half an hour a day, maybe at the beginning of the day. Everybody has a different rhythm. So I don't want to impose any rhythm on anybody. But my point is you have to find it, because if you don't find it, you're never going to get into that state where you can really enjoy writing. And if you want to write or edit, you have to get into that state. And getting that is really the gateway to all of the pleasure of writing. And when you talk to writers, we'll all tell you that writing a book is a form of torture. And it is a form of torture to a certain point. And then it really, when you get into that state of flow when you're writing for however long, there's nothing beats it. It's just a wonderful, wonderful experience because the self falls away. You have no consciousness of time. It's out of time, out of space. Things seem to flow. And it's just a exceedingly rewarding state to be in. And that rhythm pushes you, developing your rhythm and knowing the conditions in which you work and putting them together whenever you sit down to write, that is going to all work together to motivate you and push you to work, and occasionally, when you get lucky, get you into that state of flow, which is just one of the great joys of life. So I think that you have to become, the first step of that is just finding the time and do it, and then becoming familiar with those elements, whatever it is, however you've prepared your mind, prepared your time, prepared your space. You have to become familiar with what works for you. And then just doing it and getting those into place every time. And then you become aware of the texture of your thoughts. And, there comes this dramatic arc when you work. So, you get into this state and you're able to think and express your thoughts, not without work, but the work becomes the pleasure because it starts moving, and the rhythm is one of the things that helps pull you along. And sooner or later, the state of flow is going to end, but it will have been so rewarding. And that's, of course, another perfect time to sit back and say, well, what was it that enabled me to be in that place? And every time it happens, it's worth thinking over, how did I get here? Because those are the conditions you want to always recreate, although sometimes it'll happen without you setting a stage for it. And how fortunate you are when that happens. And then that frees you to be lost in your work and to do work, hopefully, that you'll certainly enjoy, but also that you like, because being in that state of flow gives you an extra energy, an energy to keep going, but an energy to really resolve a lot of the problems that always crop up in any expressive form. As I have always said, writing is very often solving a lot of problems, whether it's in developing your plot and weaving in the characters and the ways they interact, or whether it's in reporting factual information. So I really want to emphasize the value of rhythm as something that you should aim for and that abets you in doing what it is that you want to do, whatever it is that you want to write, or engage with whatever expressive form you choose that you engage with at any time, I should say. And whether it's sitting down at the computer and writing a note to someone, a heartfelt note. Like many people, I mean, I've had to sit down and write condolence notes, and, I sit there and I don't just want to just shoot off a cliche. Someone has had a lifetime of experience with someone important to them that they've lost, and you somehow want to get to their head or their heart in some way to console them. And so I reach into myself to find a new way of expressing thoughts based on what I know about that person and how they live their life. So it isn't just so sorry for your loss. So what I'm saying is that when you're a writer, every time you sit down at the computer becomes an opportunity for thinking things through and for writing in a creative way. And I think you should always think about it. Now, I have to say that a lot of my emails during the day, are very utilitarian, but there are a lot that are not too, and they get a fair amount of creative thought. And that's part of the practice. So you're in a way, you're always being on because it becomes part of your nature. I am a writer. I don't suspend being a writer when I'm sitting down to write an email, although not all my emails are artful, but sometimes they are. So whatever you do, whether it's writing an email or writing your memoir or whatever task you've set yourself, reporting factual information, the same approach should apply. And I know how I've developed my own sense of rhythm, and I'd love to hear from anybody any thoughts that they have about the process of knowing themselves as a writer and then incorporating that into setting the stage for doing more writing and editing. Any thoughts from anybody? No thoughts?
I don't know, really. I haven't quite worked everything out yet. The only thing I've got worked out so far is that it's better in the morning and at night when there's no ambient noise around. And the only other thing I have worked out is that sometimes it takes a while to think about something before you actually put something on the paper.
Yeah, I think that a lot of things take a lot of thought beforehand. Sometimes things take years. An idea can colonize your brain, and you may not have everything that you want to say ready at that time. It may be an issue that's sticking in your brain, and then one day suddenly some things gel in your brain. So yeah, it could take some time to do some preparation, whether it's deliberate or accidental, or personally, you just have to develop enough experience to for things that you've been thinking about to come together. And by the way, it wouldn't even be worth talking about if it didn't require a certain amount of thought, a certain amount of experience. If it were just something that could roll off the top of your head, why then that has a different importance than something that really requires deep thought or extended thought or some kind of maturation of a thought process. I know for me, even as a professional writer, so here's the thing that comes up very often, and that is there is this great mythology. I don't know if it's restricted to our culture or if it's across all cultures, but there's this great mythology that, I do my best work under pressure. And I'd be happy to guarantee you that that's not true. And you may have, there may be, what I think happens is that sometimes we do our best thinking certain pieces of information gel in our head. This is not unrelated to what Dwayne was talking about. When things start coming together and we start seeing things, and there are things that we've been thinking about for a long time or a short time that have been on our brain, and when we start seeing how it comes together, that creates a pressure. And that creates a pressure to see it, to express it, to write it down so that we hold on to that way of seeing it and know that we saw it whole once. And that's good for our own personal development. And certainly if you're a writer, to have some idea worked out, fully formed, that and that will somehow go into whatever writing you're doing. But that's very different from saying, oh, I need to leave things for the last moment to work up enough pressure to think the best thoughts so that I can write. And I think it's a confusion of those two kinds of pressure, because what happens if you're really serious and you leave things for the last moment, you may be able to write some of what you want, but you won't be able to get done all that you want. And if you do that, and by the way, I was someone who was under that illusion because it had worked for me one or two times. And then I had to write a cover story for a magazine where I was among exceedingly talented people, and certainly wanted to perform up to standard. And I didn't really leave myself enough time. And I got it done. But there were other thoughts. I knew I didn't leave myself time to think about fully enough because I enjoyed the way I was writing. And I knew I could have done better than I did. It was okay. But I didn't enjoy it so much because I felt I had boxed myself in. I was under that illusion that I needed the pressure. And you do that once or twice, and pretty soon you start self-correcting. You start moving the time, you start working, you keep moving it forward or backward, I guess, whatever direction, so that you leave more room for yourself to write. And I can't tell you how rewarding that is, to have enough space for writing. I mean, I came at it, I had no discipline. I didn't go to writing school. I didn't go to journalism school. I just did my undergraduate degree in English literature. Yes, I had a sense of rhythm. Poetry was drilled into me from the time I was reading poetry from the time I was 10. So I had a sense of the rhythm of language and knew that had to inform my writing. But I had no discipline whatsoever. And as I said, just a mythology. That's fairly widespread, particularly at college, that it all comes together at the last minute. Well, if it does all come together at the last minute, you're not leaving yourself the room for it to come together beautifully at the last minute. You can cram some things in. But if you're a really creative and expressive person, you need that space to let it all play out. So sooner or later, I moved the deadlines back by myself. I would say, after a good 10 years, I had a pretty good sense of discipline and knew that the minute I started on an idea or an assignment, it was really good to start writing down my earliest ideas and how to capture them. And because my own particular mindset when I work is I like to work in the biggest frame. I think it's really important for people to understand things. I may not focus on the widest frame, but I have to cover from the biggest frame to the part, that center part that I want to explore. And I think that's a way of working that appeals to a lot of people. I don't demand it, and it isn't the way I work on everything, but it's a way that really helps me understand things, very helpful for me to get a grasp of what essentially I want to do. And usually I have the biggest perspective before I really get into researching something. So I will put things down on paper when I start. Right at the moment, I start on an assignment and I get enthusiastic about an idea, I'll just make note of sort of my broadest thoughts on a topic. And they become important because they orient me to what the goal is. When I get further on and deeper and often lost into facts and ideas and thoughts and new ways of putting things together, it helps to have that early orientation. So that became part of my discipline and part of the way I've built in for myself to work. And so that's part of my creative rhythm is having that early notation and that early outer rim, the outer crust of what it is before I go in and sort of crack the nut of an idea. And I built that into knowledge about myself, and it became part of the discipline. And to make sure I had time for that, make sure I did it early on, and then develop a rhythm. So, later than most people who have gone on to, anyone who's got a master's degree, a fine arts degree in writing, or journalism, to master's in journalism, knows far more than I started out with. And not necessarily a person of discipline, but very early on, I really caught on to myself. There was no one standing over me telling me what I needed to do, or even that I needed to do it, but caught on to the pleasures of writing and knowing that I had to leave enough time for it, and observe myself and what worked, and then put that back into setting myself up. And honestly, it's really a pleasure to have that discipline, to have that rhythm, because I'm sure I've said it, you don't always have the motivation. Your motivation isn't necessarily going to be consistent from day to day. And a rhythm is what pulls you along when motivation doesn't. And rhythm is just very important in life and lots of things. And just think of dancing, and the rhythm is what makes movement so pleasurable. You don't even feel like you're moving. It's that rhythm provides so much of the pleasure. And in fact, we go out of our way to seek it. And yet, if you were an alien coming to visit Earth, you would look at it and say, wow, that's a form of exercise done rhythmically. And that can really push you along and help you get done whatever the goal is that you set for yourself. So I started out as no angel, and I can now pretty much gauge what it's going to take, gauge how I'm going to engage with something, and what I need to do something. And of course, not everything I approach with the same enthusiasm, but knowing that the rhythm, I can enjoy the rhythm of something, is really helpful to me, and helps me do the things that I need to do, as well as the things that I want to do.
You know what I just realized? What usually helps me out is when I realize what the end of the piece is going to be.
That's something beautiful, Twain. Yes. So you just brought up an important point. So knowing what the end of the piece is going to be is one way to drive yourself through, because you have the destination, and that's really a force pulling you through what you want to say. How do you get there? And that's going to be unique to you. For me, Dwayne, I share that because very many times when I'm writing, I know where I want my piece to end. I know what the last word is going to be, or the last quote, or the last sentence. And it's always, there is a great pleasure that comes from knowing that, because there are many different routes you can take to a destination, and there are many factors that are going to influence your choice of route. So in a way, that's a luxury, and it gives you lots of options. And I always love when that happens. I don't know about you, it doesn't always happen with me that I know the end first. Sometimes I know, sometimes for me, it's doing what I ask everybody to do who tells me that they want to write a book. Write the shortest possible paragraph, making a point about what, describing, saying what it is that your book is about and why it's important. And when I get to that point, and that will become my, what we call the deck, the subhead in an article below the title. I don't always know the title or the headline before, until well after I'm finished. But knowing that pointed, why am I doing, where is this article going, what is its importance, what is it about really? What is it about, and why is it important, has to go into whatever that deck is in a very pointed movie trailer way that pulls you in and has to tell you something new, has to give you an incentive for paying attention to it. Sometimes it's getting that drives me all the way through. It's like, oh, I can relax. I know what it is that I'm writing about now and why. And then I have the luxury of choosing what I want. That might even differ, by day. But there's a pleasure that then comes from being able to make those kinds of choices. Having the end is one, because that's a very important place. What's your destination in writing? Having an end. Sometimes it's having the beginning. Sometimes I don't know what the opening paragraph of my article or whatever it is that I'm doing, I don't know what it's going to be. I usually need that to get going. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'll come back and do it. Depends on the article. Every once in a while, I'll start shortly after that without having put that sort of opening overture to the article together, but I will have put the body of the piece, written the body of the piece. But I think the ending is really important. And that becomes a motivation. I'm assuming for you, once you have the end, that's going to drive you pretty much as you write.
It usually does. So for me, I usually will start writing by writing whatever the beginning is, and then somewhere in the middle of the second or third paragraph, or I don't have to be writing, but I would have already started have three paragraphs before I say, oh, this is what the end should be, and then I'm able to move forward, even if I don't have all of the research ready or figure out what the story is going to be or anything like that.
Right. And I would say that's a way that I work too. That works for me very much. I rarely have the ending before I have the beginning, but yeah, it takes being a little bit into it to know where the whole thing is going, and not just where it's going, but exactly how it's going to end. I mean, I'm just thinking now of pieces that I've done and the endings and kind of where I was in the article when I knew what the ending was going to be. And so the ending, knowing what the nub of the article is going to be, can be a spur. It won't necessarily tell you what the beginning of your piece is going to be, but it's going to give you a sense of the extent of the world that you've carved out, because you can't cover everything in every piece of writing that you do, or at least I hope you can. And sometimes for me, I think I've said this before, because rhythm of language is so important to me, I know what things sound like sometimes before I know what the words are. And that brings up another point to me, that sometimes an article has to have a tone. It has to have a consistent tone all the way through. Not my usual voice, not a repertorial voice, but the subject itself demands a tone. Sometimes, I mean, I could think of an article about grief that I wrote. And I wanted the piece to have a certain thoughtful, quiet tone. And I wanted the introduction of ideas to have that thoughtful, quiet play, illuminating and comforting, and yet fresh, eye-opening. Hopefully you haven't seen all this anywhere else. And so I had to work knowing the tone, finding that tone, and then boom, that becomes a driver of doing an article. And the only thing wrong with having articles in which you know have to have a very specific tone is that you don't always immediately get the tone back. If you're writing an article that's going to take you a week or 2 weeks or even longer, or even a book, each time out, you don't exactly strike that tone. I have my own techniques for getting back that tone, and that is no matter where I am in the article, even if I'm at the end and I want a piece to be in one tone, I read what I've written over and over again, so that becomes second nature, so that I'm inside the writing. And then once I've repeated it enough, read it enough, sometimes just once, but other times I need to read it 2 or 3 times, and then by that it's kind of inducted me into the right tone for the piece, and I can just continue on in that very special tone. And I think of the grief piece as a recent example, but I know historically that there have been many other articles that I've done in a different kind of tone. Sometimes you want a tone of levity and wit and great playfulness. I mean, tone's going to vary depending on the topic and the goal of writing, but getting into that tone can sometimes take some work, and usually it's writing on the tracks that you've already laid down that will help you continue on that track. So it means going back and reading it and getting into that groove of language. Because if you're a writer, as you are with any artist, you have many forms, you have many voices, you have many you have many tones, you have many, hopefully you're adapting what you're doing to the topic and what you want to say, and you have many choices that you could make. And so you make a particular choice that you're going to use a specific tone for an article. And as I say, the challenge is always getting back into that tone if it isn't just a 200-word article that you write in one sitting. So, Dwayne, I'm glad you brought up the ending, because that's a good way of knowing what works for you and getting yourself through a piece. And for some, it's the beginning, it's the first word. But as I said before, it's very idiosyncratic, and it's part of knowing yourself. You have to know yourself what's going to get you through, and the only way you know that really is by practice, and that practice in the beginning takes discipline, as it does with any art. I don't know that it takes the 10,000 hours that's often bandied about as to becoming an expert, but it certainly takes a fair amount of time to become practiced at something where you willingly, happily, joyfully pick up whatever your writing instrument is and use it. And whether it's in an email or the great American novel.
It's felt like 10,000 hours, I can tell you that much.
Yeah, I think that if we count the time of emails and casual correspondence, you've just challenged me, Dwayne. I think it's something I might want to sit down and calculate pretty soon and just see how close is it to that. And of course, my whole life has not been spent on a computer. I mean, I've only been on a computer very consistently since 1990.
Okay.
Internet since 1996. So writing before 1990 was a different beast. We were doing it on typewriters and by hand. And I loved writing by hand. Now I like writing notes by hand. When I have thoughts, I really love the computer, because I am not penalized for refining my thought and refining it and getting the exact word and getting it to be just as I want. So, I mean, I was really thrilled when computers came along and we could do that. And that's really how I saw it. Oh my God, I'm not penalized for rethinking things and refining my thoughts as I go.
Yeah, I've tried calculating from law school to now. I lost track. I'd really have to sit down with a spreadsheet or something.
How long since you've been out of law school, Dwayne?
2013, so 6 years, almost 7 years at this point.
But and so, did I read correctly that your goal is to be a judge?
No, that's a backup plan.
That's your backup plan. So yeah. The main plan is
working towards writing and consulting, that sort of thing.
Okay. So the judge is the backup plan, and they're not mutually exclusive, because there've been many people who've had careers in law who've also been significant writers.
I think I've heard that before. But it's weird. It's like, I have some restrictions on me. I work for a judge. So I have some restrictions on what I can do and what I can say because of that.
That is true. Yes, okay. You're not writing fiction. There are restrictions on what you can say. That's absolutely the case.
Yeah. I mean, I like the job. I'm just not interested in being a judge. But if everything else fails, I have enough experience to do the job. I know what the job is like. So, and it pays
Yes.
well. So I'll do it if I need to. But hopefully,
Right. That's good. It's good to have that as a backup plan.
yeah, it's
Not everybody has judgeship as their backup plan, I can
right.
assure you. You know, so um, what works for other people? Anybody want to volunteer? What works for them? I guess not. Um, so, um, you know, the more about the creative rhythm. So I think that um, rhythm both as a driver of what you do, finding your own creative rhythm. And I urge you to think of it as the creative rhythm, um, because that's an exceedingly pleasant way to think about it. And that's what it definitely becomes. So having a creative rhythm to get you about the process, about the way you work. But my real favorite is the rhythm of writing and rhythm in writing, and why that's so important. And it becomes paying attention to the rhythm of your words, the sound of the words. And I hope when everybody writes, they write by reading the words in their head and sounding out the words in their head, putting them down, capturing them, definitely, absolutely essential. And then refining what you say, and then taking the step further of reading what you wrote as if you were reading it out loud, giving a talk where not everything had the same rhythm, where you wanted to emphasize some things. And I think doing that is essential, because I think everybody reads not in a monotone, but reads as if they, or many people read as if they are hearing the words or sounding out the words. And even if they're not, the rhythm of the words themselves, the way they are put together, becomes an element of helping the writer through whatever it is that you've written, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. The rhythm of the language is one of those things that's part of the art of writing, part of the creative expression that is helpful to you in writing. It's certainly helpful to me because, as I said, I sometimes know the rhythm that I want something to have before I know what the exact words are, but it's definitely helpful to the reader. And when there's a rhythm to the words, they become far more memorable. I don't want to point to your memory of all kinds of ridiculous lyrics, of all kinds of ridiculous songs, but think about it. I mean, you know those words, and they may not be the world's most profound, because they have a certain rhythm that motivate you and move you to move yourself and enjoy. And I don't think writing deserves any less than that. And it just happens to be my personal thing from having spent years as a kid, thrilled that I was in the adult library and never getting past the poetry books, which were the first bookcases up the ramp from the kids' library to the adult library. I never really got past that in my great joy of going into the adult library. So rhythm is on my brain, but I respond to it in everybody's writing, and it becomes very memorable to the reader. And it's a device that doesn't often get talked about in writing classes, but I think it's really important. It's what makes a lot of good writing really memorable. So I think of rhythm as both the part of the process and inherent part of the content, a vessel of the content. And one moves you and one moves the reader. And they're so that they are both really important. What else comes up in terms of being creative and rhythm? I mean, just that, I mean, the whole rhythm of life of noticing and capturing ideas. So this morning, so for you, for most of you, it's who are on the Zoom call, at least, you're in New York, and it's 3 going on 4. And for me, it's 12 going on 1. I've been displaced to the West Coast. So early in the morning, I was at the farmer's market, and the rhythm of the gorgeous fruits and vegetables on display. Oh my gosh. Well, of course, every farmer's market in the United States, we're now in the lush season, but here always it's really very lush. So it's gorgeous, and there's a rhythm to the way the vegetables and the fruits are set up at the market. But I went out this morning, with some rough ideas of what I was going to talk about, and also open to ideas along the way, knowing that something would strike me because I pay attention to things and I can find meaning for lots of things. Lots of things open up half-formed ideas already in my brain, remind me of them. So this morning, despite all of that magnificence at the farmer's market and going to it and getting home and having this fabulous array of fruits and vegetables, it was a conversation, someone else's conversation about what's creative that just stopped me cold. And I thought, wow, this is a really great idea. And that is really what I wanted to share with you. Because I think it's such an under-discussed part of art, and yet such an important part both for the writer and the reader. And if I leave you with nothing else, it's to, when you practice what you do, it's to find that rhythm that really works best for you, and to know to analyze what elements lead to it, because that's what you want to replicate every time you sit down with intention to write something that you want to give time to. So that pretty much wraps up my thought for the day, and I hope it helps you in writing. And I really would be very happy to answer any questions anybody wants to send to me by email, or contact me in any other way. And any other questions that could be important that we ought to put on the table for a next discussion.
Hara, what email can people use to reach you, and how can they contact you if they wanted to reach out to you by email or on social media?
So my Twitter is at Hara Marano. And the best email for me would be hara.marano@gmail.com.